So why is the Bitcoin user experience not really the best today? And more importantly, how did it get that way? Alright, so anyone who actually uses Bitcoin knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I have to say, it's relatively few people who think they're Bitcoiners or think they're investors or whatever actually touch this stuff. Almost everyone just goes on an exchange or brokerage and just logs in and buys some stuff, links their bank account, whatever, and then they buy and sell it there. Or if they want to actually use it on chain, pretty much the one time they actually have to do that is they want to move it to cold storage because they heard you're not supposed to keep this on exchanges. So they move to their Trezor or whatever, and then let's just say it's like $10,000 worth or whatever, and then they pay 10 to 20, let's say $20 in fees to do that. They don't even notice it, right? So very few people have any kind of experience sending and receiving and holding and buying things with it in that kind of like real sort of a way where they actually know what network congestion is like, and they actually know what the fees are, they know how these things work and all that kind of stuff. But for those of you who might not have actually used it recently or very consistently, here are some of the bigger user experience problems that have manifested themselves. Of course, high fees and confirmation times. It's very difficult these days to get a Bitcoin transaction through in any kind of a fast time frame, like 20, 30 minutes, whatever, without paying a lot in fees. We're talking like $20, $30. Depends on exactly when you're watching this, because it could be way higher or it could actually be lower. But it's a lot to send with any kind of urgency, really. Now, of course, if you're willing to pay a smaller fee, still in the several dollar range, you might be waiting several hours or, sometimes even days or weeks. Depends on the network congestion at any one time. And of course, this depends on time of day and time during the week, because obviously there's big transaction spikes at some point, and then things kind of cool off at other points, other times of the day, as well as certain days of the week. So if you're willing to wait for those valleys, you can get away with a lot lower of a fee, but it might be, days or weeks to go through. And a lot of people don't know this. A lot of people don't know that you can't just send a transaction and it just works. Another one that's especially kind of hidden in there because it doesn't manifest itself very often is network disruptions. Specifically, something to do with mining hash rate going way up or way down and the effects of that. See, Bitcoin's mining difficulty only adjusts every, I think it's 2016 blocks. Each block is 10 minutes, so multiply that by 2016, and that's how long it takes before the network adjusts. So let's just say you lose a quarter of your mining power due to an outage in China. Again, this is actually what happened not too long ago. Then all of a sudden, you have 25% less, roughly speaking, transaction processing throughput during that time where it takes for either the hash rate to go back up or for the difficulty to adjust. So obviously if you get the hash rate back, then you only have that limited capacity for that period of time when you have the outage. But if it never comes back, let's say the price drops enough to where people won't mine for that price, then you just have to wait the 2016 blocks for that to happen. And that caused quite a few disruptions in the network. Fees went way to the roof, things like that. And a lot of people just think that, as long as there's someone mining, as long as this is working out, everything's going to go smooth. And I mean, that's true that as long as someone's mining, someone's running the infrastructure, a big chunk can fall away and the network will still work. It just won't work that well. And especially in today's congested state, that could really cause a terrible user experience compared to, let's say, the previous day. Now, this is something that might become a little bit worse with the whole Taproot thing coming up, is way too many address formats and other kind of settings. I mean, in most cryptocurrencies and in the way Bitcoin used to work back in the day, you had one type of address. It looks like a Bitcoin address. That's just all you use. But then they introduced SegWit. Now there's another type. I think there might even be more than one extra type. So you could send to the wrong address format. If your wallet doesn't know how to recognize that format, then it just doesn't work. And then of course you have payment protocols like BIP70 or BIP270 or whatever, which you can scan into, and they might have been removed from Bitcoin Core wallet support, but still stands. With Taproot, you're going to have another one. And so all these different settings and things flying around that could be consolidated in just one experience, but instead they're just all over the place. If you're a technical user, you know what you're looking at. It's not really a problem. But for new people, they're just like, I'm trying to scan it. It doesn't work. It says it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? And, there you go. And the big one, of course, is a difficult to use and complicated scaling solution. talking about the Lightning Network. Of course, there's other things like Liquid out there, which I won't even go into right now. But the Lightning Network is supposedly how you're supposed to send and receive Bitcoin in smaller amounts in the modern day. And anyone who's tried to use it, it's come a long way in the basic like phone wallet type things where you don't have to run your own full node, but it's still clunky to use with a bunch of different limitations and such, and a bunch of things that can go wrong, routing errors, not enough funds in specific channels. Even if there's a service that's handling all this for you, sometimes you can still bump into those limitations. And so it's not exactly where, oh, I hear Lightning works really well, and you get a wallet and someone sends you some there, like, oh wow, that was easy. Wow, I'm going to send some to Bitrefill to buy something. Oh, that was easy. There's some of that, but if you use it around a little bit more, you start to bump into all these kinds of headaches. And so that's another big kind of problem that, makes Bitcoin not as easy or fun to use as it otherwise I think should be. Now let's go into why it turned out this way. Of course, some of this stuff might be contentious with political people out there, but whatever. I'm going to say it how I understand it to the best of my abilities while trying to remain fair. So one reason why Bitcoin shuffled out this way, why this is the way things work, is because of the 1 megabyte block size limit. Essentially, the reason why you have these transaction capacity limitations, and then therefore the long processing times and the fees, is congestion due to the fact that blocks are only 1 megabyte large and have not been made bigger explicitly. Depending on who you ask, this is either fine because it should never have gone this much on chain. Everyone should be using Lightning instead of just putting it on the main chain, or it's terrible and Bitcoin's broken, doesn't work. Depending on who you ask, that's the political component. But just calling it like it is, the 1 megabyte block has changed the user experience for the average person and has informed a lot of these other development decisions that are out there, like adding on segregated witness and stuff like that, and then of course Lightning Network, and trying to make things like Taproot happen for Lightning to work better, for example, among other things. And a lot of this stuff has been informed by just that decision of, we're not going to scale on-chain. We're going to keep the block at 1 megabyte. So that's kind of one of the larger catalysts behind why things are the way they are today. The Bitcoin block size debate was ended in 2017 when SegWit was implemented and a block size increase was not. On-chain scaling proponents split off to Bitcoin Cash and later its children. Since then, no serious talk has happened about increasing Bitcoin's block size. The second is undoubtedly the hard fork pause, where every time you do an upgrade with Bitcoin these days, the developer community has kind of shied away from what's called a hard fork, or a breaking change, some kind of a change that makes everything else not work unless they kind of come up to speed with it. And because there's a lot of cryptocurrencies out there that hard fork regularly to upgrade their core protocol, Bitcoin does not, except for some really extreme cases which have not happened in recent years. And so because of this, a lot of these upgrades, like for example, switching to segregated witness, SegWit, or Taproot and stuff, are being done as soft forks, where it's kind of on top. You can still run stuff that doesn't really support it. And because of that, you start juggling all these different implementations. It's not just the network works one way. The network could work one way or another way or another way. There's a few little differences depending on who you're going to use. And therefore, a lot of these changes, which could be really cool or whatever, they are not mandatory. And so they're supported by a minority of the network in a lot of cases, even years later. There's some good reasoning behind this. Every time you hard fork, everyone else has to upgrade or their software stops working, or they split off and accidentally make a whole new network. So hard forking is inherently more risky and disruptive. However, this also means that you can't implement any major changes that won't work unless the entire network is on the same page. And third, in all fairness, there's this sort of network inertia thing where you start the network one way, you build it a certain way, and you can't just keep on breaking it completely and doing something completely different. Like, this block interval was this big, we're going to just switch it like this. We're going to switch from mining to part mining, part staked, or fully proof of stake, or we're going to add in smart contract. We're going to get rid of UTXO-based systems and just do an account basis. There's a lot of stuff that's really messy to try to change down the road. And to a certain extent, you're sort of stuck with some basics of where you started, or if you make some giant changes, it's just not going to be good for you. And so that's one of the reasons why there's just not a lot of movement to change things radically. And of course, there's also the mother codebase idea, where Bitcoin was the first great cryptocurrency. And a lot of projects copied the code of Bitcoin and then made all their tweaks on top of that. And even then, whenever there's anything compatible that comes out on the Bitcoin codebase, they backport it to these other projects. And so there's a lot of value in Bitcoin being the mother codebase. And as such, you don't want something that's fluctuating or changing all the time. You want something that's very stable for everyone to sort of copy the homework off of. And all the more radical changes happen on different chains, on different networks. But basically, there's an incentive to keep things relatively slow moving and nothing too radical on the main Bitcoin chain. Untold hundreds, if not thousands, of cryptocurrencies are based on Bitcoin. Many, including Litecoin, Dash, and many more, backport to Bitcoin, and it's one of the most stable and well worked through code bases in the industry. This incentivizes Bitcoin to be as simple and stable as possible. Well, let's not also forget that to a similar and lesser extent, but still, a lot of the major Bitcoin-based cryptocurrencies kind of have the same philosophical change-resistant mentality, whether it's the major Bitcoin forks or whether it's Litecoin or something like that, that just want to operate in that old school way just because, it's just the way they do things. They don't want to do everything new. They don't want to do big changes. It's just kind of the attitude and the philosophy. Bitcoin SV's entire shtick is being the original Bitcoin, just an older version of Bitcoin with a bigger block size and some additional data carrying capacity enabled. Bitcoin Cash is much more accepting of change, having added incremental changes such as enabling more data in transactions and doing away with the unconfirmed transaction limit, but still tries to be old school by keeping basic proof-of-work structure and 10-minute block interval and more. Litecoin is mainly interested in copying what Bitcoin does. Now that we ended up covering why Bitcoin kind of ended up in this sort of a way, now let's talk about some of the actual practical implications of those things that caused, in the very beginning, what we were talking about, which was those user experience issues. Of course, first I already mentioned the limited block size space. Because it's just 1 megabyte, there's only so many transactions you can cram in there. This makes timely block space scarce, which means if you want space in those blocks in a certain time frame, that's scarce, and if there's value behind that scarcity, right, that just amplifies it up and makes the price go up, i.e. the fees go up. And so because there's so much scarcity there, you're going to have high fees. And then there's demand for, the next longer time frame. Oh, I need it within an hour, but I don't need it right away. And there's still puts the price up there. And so, of course, down the way, if you want to have a relatively inexpensive transaction, which is still going to be more expensive than I'd want, you're going to have to wait a long time. So those confirmation times and prices of fees are a direct result of that one technical limitation of the 1 megabyte block size. It's pretty hard to argue against that, And because of this old school mentality and the decision to not really hard fork, you have the difficulty adjustment where it takes, 2016 or so blocks to adjust the Bitcoin mining difficulty, which means if you have some major disruption, the network doesn't work very well or doesn't work as planned for a long time. And so, or, you have a big rush of extra hash, right? You can start kicking out blocks really fast. And it's just, all that is just because of that limitation, that people don't want to upgrade it and change it to a adjust every block kind of difficulty mechanism, or they want to change it, but they can't because of, the implications of making a breaking change in a hard fork, whatever you want to call it. That's the reason why you have those disruptions still today. And of course, this deep insistence on soft fork upgrades instead of hard fork upgrades is really what makes all this variability in address formats and other things like that persist. Other than that, if we did a hard fork instead, if we just upgraded everything to Taproot, let's say, one address format and that's it, you wouldn't have to worry about implementation, you wouldn't have to worry about anything else. But because of the way things shook out, then you have legacy addresses, you have SegWit addresses, and you have a bunch, and then we have the Taproot addresses and all these other things that people have to sort of juggle around, and things would be a lot neater. And also, for example, one argument for segregated witness back in the day was, this will allow more transactions to go through the network. This will be kind of like a block size increase, but not really. So right now, that's not the majority, or is barely the majority of Bitcoin transactions. So imagine if that had been a hard fork instead, and all of them had been that way. You would save a lot more space in the blocks for years by just making it a mandatory thing and not like an opt-in type of a thing. And finally, and this is a little bit more of a tricky and technical thing with a lot of, caveats and details and stuff, so I won't really go into too much detail, but the Lightning Network works the way it does, or doesn't work the way it does, as depending on your perspective, because of Bitcoin's underlying structure. It's basically a way of stringing together payment channels of like me and you open up a channel together and send payments back and forth, and they just sort of string together different channels and link them all together. And because of that, it allows the whole thing to work, but also it makes it annoying to do stuff like balance liquidity between channels. That's, in my opinion, probably the most annoying thing about Lightning, is having to do that, whereas off-chain scaling solutions for other cryptocurrencies might not really work the same way. It might be a lot easier where you just have like a side chain and you just put everything on and you don't have to worry about these weird limitations. To use Lightning, you not only have to move your funds off-chain through an on-chain transaction, but they have to be in a two-way channel with another node, which can route your payments to other nodes on the network. You can't receive any money unless partners along that route have enough liquidity. Your entire balance on Lightning isn't necessarily spendable to anyone. You might have to move some money to other channels in order to be able to send the whole thing. Same thing goes for receiving, where you have limitations on how much you can receive depending on the money other nodes have. Other Layer 2 scaling solutions don't have to work this way, with some, such as sidechains, allowing a more free-flowing method of transaction without worrying about restrictions like channels and liquidity. Well, I hope that cleared some stuff up for you. I mean, you try to actually use Bitcoin. It works in a strange way that you don't anticipate, and you think, why? Why did it get this way? How is it like that? And rather than all these crazy political arguments about, well, whatever, just watch this, right? This hopefully clears things up a little bit more, makes it a little smoother. Now, of course, if you're way ahead of me on all this, what other things did I miss? I just, mentioned those main key ones. I saw that the user experience is a little bit weird because of things that happened. What other ways has Bitcoin not evolved that you think would be much better if it would evolve, that we kind of missed in here? Please let me know in the comments and I will respond to you. Well, specifically, I'll respond to you if it's on Odyssey, and I'll definitely respond to you if it's with a tip on Odyssey. You know how it works. Grease the wheels, you get something. All right, well, I will see you guys next time. Maybe some more Lightning stuff, maybe not, but either way, I'll see you guys, and thanks so much for watching.